Hello, everybody. Hi, welcome. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, awesome. So my name is Linnea West, and I work in public programs here at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And we're here for one of our Artists in the Lab talks. The Artists in the Lab talks are a chance to highlight the voice of artists who are considering what the future can look like. And they're giving us a chance to really delve into some of the ideas in the exhibition, Designs for Different Futures. Have you all seen the exhibition? Yeah? Great. That's awesome, and if you haven't, of course, you could also go visit it again after this program because we're open late tonight. So Designs for Different Futures is considering how designers and artists are shaping how we are thinking about the future, including the future of our bodies and perhaps the future of gender, and that's something that tonight's talk is going to consider. Tonight I have the privilege of introducing the artist Mary Maggic. So some of you are probably already familiar with their work because they have two artworks on view, the video Housewives Making Drugs and an Estrogen Lab Kit, both of which imagine an alternative future where DIY biohacking is an at-home reality. So while Designs for Different Futures also shows a lot of items of design that are being used right now, that are being manufactured by corporations, those projects are a little different in that they're speculative. You know, they're going beyond where technology currently is to imagine a different kind of present and a different possible kind of future. So for tonight, I'm just going to share a little biographical information about Mary and then hand the mic over to them. They'll talk for about 35 minutes, and we're going to save our questions for the end. So any discussion you want to have then. Also, just a little bit of housekeeping. Please silence your cell phones if you haven't already. So Mary Maggic is a non-binary artist working at the fuzzy intersections of transfeminist hacking, body and gender politics, and eco-alienations. Their work has included amateur science, public workshopology, participatory performance, documentary, and speculative fiction. Mary's most recent projects, Open Source Estrogen and Estrogen Lab, generate DIY protocols for the extraction and detection of hormones from bodies and environments, demonstrating their micro-performativity and their potential for gender hacking. They have shown their work widely internationally, including as part of Transmediale in Berlin, the Sight and Sound Festival in Montreal, HEK in Basel, the Jeux de Paume in Paris, the Institute of Contemporary Art in London, the Spring Workshop in Hong Kong, and the Kickster, I think, Gender Hacking Festival in Bern. And most recently in 2019, Mary completed a 10-month Fulbright research project in Yogyakarta, Indonesia. So, without further ado, help me welcome Mary.
Thank you for that amazing introduction. So I think I will start this presentation with a short clip from Housewives Making Drugs, in case you haven't seen it yet.
Hello,
and welcome to our show.
I'm Maria,
And I'm Maria.
and we are
Housewives Making Drugs.
On today's show, Maria and I are going to show you lovely viewers at home how to get hormones without needing that pesky doctor's prescription.
That's right, Maria. We've concocted a recipe where we can reuse the estrogen that's naturally expelled from our bodies.
So you're saying that this recipe would allow us to circumvent the whole industrial medical complex?
And increase access to estrogen for trans women to gain radical body autonomy.
By sharing hormones and tapping into new systems of interdependent community?
And taking the phrase sharing is caring to a whole new level.
Wow. What do we need to make all of this happen?
This, ladies and gentlemen, non-binary, agender, and gender non-conforming folks, is the Estrofeminizer.
The only tool a real estrogen hacker needs to do her deed.
The best part is all these ingredients are cheap and easy to find.
Just how I like my men.
It's made up of silica gel and cigarette filters layered inside a modified glass bottle.
As you can see, I found these items after a heavy night of drinking and smoking.
Never mind that overpriced laboratory equipment. This is a DIY contraption for all you biohackers out there.
Whoa, hold up. Biohacking? That sounds scary.
Well, no, just think of it as something as simple as making beer or wine or even cheese.
Okay, Maria, so you're saying that we have always been biohackers?
Exactly, Maria. So to get started, we're gonna need just one more very special ingredient.
And we will tell you right after a quick but essential break.
The special ingredient is urine, if anyone is curious. Okay, so thank you all for attending. I started to research hormones back in 2015, and I was looking into the biopolitics that are around hormones in terms of how our bodies are being managed and controlled and also pathologized through hormones. So, this is a Google image search when you type in estrogen. And as you can see, a lot of the images are alluding to the pharmaceutical industry. You have images of what is femininity, what is beauty. You have images of larger breasts, a larger ass. You have images of a lot of pills, gender transition therapy. So I was thinking about what our dominant relationships are with these hormones, which always come in the form of a pill or a patch or maybe something injectable. So, because my background is in biohacking, I'm part of this kind of global movement of biohacking. I've always been interested in how we can open these black boxes and kind of free up the knowledge that is hidden within. So that's the same ethos that is shared with computer hackers, for example. So I was thinking about the hormone estrogen as a black box and how we can deconstruct this black box and thereby demystifying it. And I like to use the phrase emancipating the estrogen molecule. Um, I was also really interested in the production of the body and this kind of construction of gender. So we've had this male and female binary system for a very, very long time. And with the procurement of hormones and this whole pharmaceutical slash medical industry that was isolating, purifying, and marketing these hormones to women and men, um, they were kind of using hormones to enforce the gender binary system. So a good example of this is some of the early hormone experiments. They would take a man who was openly homosexual and they would give them testosterone in hopes of curing homosexuality. So that's kind of one way that gender and sexuality was kind of policed through these hormones, through these molecules. There's a really great quote. We didn't just find hormones in some hidden part of the world. We ourselves called them into existence. So we can also say that we use them to enforce the gender binary. As my research expanded, I started to think a lot about how hormones are already all around us as a state of toxicity. So it's really widely known now that we have all these endocrine disrupting molecules everywhere in the environment, basically residues of industrial capitalism. So primarily petrochemical, agricultural, and pharmaceutical industries, um, they have produced so much of these items, these molecules, these materials that they've completely pervaded our planet, and they're completely ubiquitous. So I kind of frame this as a molecular colonization, not only on our bodies and environments, but also our ideologies. One very popular example is, of course, BPA. So this is a molecule that scientists have known to be estrogenic since the 1930s. And so we can arguably say that our bodies have been queering since the 1930s. So it's one of the most ubiquitous molecules in the world. it's a common plasticizer. You find it in products everywhere. Probably this table contains BPA, and the chairs you're sitting on, the clothes that you wear, you find it in food. You just find it everywhere. And even though there's a lot of awareness about BPA, like lots of products will be labeled BPA free, these companies actually produce molecules like BPS, which is basically the same as BPA, but they don't have to say like, oh, BPS free, because the public is not aware of that yet. So, it basically acts the same as BPA. And now we have this really horrifying situation where by 2050, there will be more particles of plastic in the ocean than there are fish. So, um, you're probably wondering, like, how is this working? Like, why are these molecules affecting our bodies and bodies of non-human species? Well, the green molecule that you see up there, that's a 3D rendering of the estrogen receptor. And scientists describe this receptor as promiscuous, which means that there are many keys that fit its lock. So the opposite of selective. And that's kind of the paradox of living in the Anthropocene, is that we didn't intend for these molecules to be communicating to our receptors, but they do. And so the semiosis that happens, the communication that happens at the molecular level, it causes this kind of chain reaction in our bodies. And the effects are quite a big range. We have neurological effects where, you know, they've linked it to autism, to ADHD, to mood disorders, depression, lower IQ. And there's also physiological symptoms like early onset puberty. So a lot of young girls are starting menstruation very early. There's also for men, men in Europe, their sperm count has dropped more than 50%, which is quite a lot. Um, but I guess it's still possible to reproduce, obviously, but 50% is still a lot. And of course, there's lots of cancers. There's testicular and ovarian, cervical cancers that are linked to these molecules. So my practice in the pursuit of emancipating the estrogen molecule, um, there's many ways to describe my practice. Freak science or estrogen geeking, but the term that I am most like drawn to is the term public amateurism. And this is a term I'm borrowing from Claire Pentecost, who is a writer and an artist. And basically, what she means is learning and doing and also failing in the public sphere. So I think that's a really important practice to be making when you're doing non institutional biology or non institutional science, because in that process, you're also aware of the barriers that you encounter when you are, you know, practicing science without an institutional affiliation. Some of my biggest influences are these art collectives from, I would say, like the early 2000s. So there's Critical Art Ensemble and Sub Rosa. They've done a lot of projects around biopolitics, biopower, and just how to reveal this performative element in this like corporate, industrial, medical like conglomerate that is ruling our lives. So they are definitely uh, they really gave me that critical perspective when you're working with science. I'm also very influenced by the trans hack feminists who created Gynepunk Lab, which is basically this, they call it a riot of bodies. So they don't identify as a collective or whatever, but they are a riot of bodies. And basically, Paula Pin, who I've worked with many times, we've collaborated. She's making a lot of like mobile labs for basically DIY gynecology. So she's making amazing fanzines as well that teach you how to check yourself for cervical cancer using just a DIY microscope. So I think they're doing really, really interesting and groundbreaking work. So my own work has also taken on like a mobile lab aesthetic because I do give a lot of workshops about my hormone hacking protocols. And so I realized that my work had to figure out this, like, how to be nomadic and how to travel with all of these like buffers and reagents. And I have transgenic yeast as well. And I'm going to go into the protocols now. So the first kind of hormone hacking recipe that I was working with are these yeast biosensors. And I was trying to think, I want to visualize or be able to visualize the semiosis that happens when an estrogenic molecule is binding to our receptors. And so the yeast allowed me to do that because I actually engineered them to contain the human estrogen receptor. So they have this like inside their cell. And when I expose them to something that, is estrogenic, that I know is estrogenic, they will actually turn yellow. So for me, this was super like revolutionary because I wanted to have this like extension of my body, this way to visualize the communication happening at the molecular level. So I was working with this for a while, and then I started to go into extraction. So this is another lab that you can see here, and inside this suitcase, I have like a DIY column chromatography experiment that is used for extracting hormones from the urine. And then in the tin box, I have this series of peristaltic pumps that is used to extract hormones from large bodies of water. So let's say if you take a river sample or a sample from your water supply. So that's what that is. It's the extraction lab. And here's a kind of close up on the DIY column chromatography. And so the first like iteration of this protocol was like we just smashed like a wine bottle and like flipped it around and used it as the glassware for this protocol. And then we also, because we're all smokers and we roll our own cigarettes, we were using cigarette filters as the non-polar substrate that would trap hormones. So yeah, just with a bit of science, with a bit of luck, with a bit of reckless behavior, we came up with this protocol. And here's what the hormones look like when they're extracted. So they have this like brown, sticky, like feel to it. And then we also like to do little exercises with the participants. Like we have them like smell the hormones. And what's really interesting is I always get 1 out of 3 answers, which is like horrible and disgusting, kind of sweet and caramelly, and I don't smell anything at all. And every person's reaction is different because we all have a different set of receptors in our nose. And actually, smell is the least understood out of all the 5 senses. And what's also interesting is that if you think about why dogs are smelling each other's asses, they're actually smelling the hormone residues that come from urine that collect around the ass area. And if you think about dogs' reactions, they also have 1 out of 3 reactions when they're smelling each other. They really like that dog, they really hate that dog, or they just don't care at all. So I feel like these hormones, when they're outside of our bodies and acting as pheromones, I think they actually activate something very ancient and evolutionary inside our brains. I'm not super scientific about this, but it's just like an intuitive feeling. And here's a series of images of what my workshops typically look like. So as you can see, it's like super messy. Like we have like methanol and like different alcohols, and we have like urine, and we have a lot of hardware. We also have fire sometimes, and I kind of like to embrace this mess because like I said, like I'm not doing an institutional science practice, I'm doing freak science. And this is also reflected in the way that I document my work. If you go on my website, it's also like super messy and it's just like the queer version of science. And I like to keep it that way. So this is on display right now at PMA. And I thought it was interesting that the curators wanted to display my mobile labs as art objects. And so you can see them. And I've had to make new labs since I've had these, since they're on loan to the PMA. And because they are a huge source of my yearly income. But yeah, I'm really, really grateful to be part of this exhibition. And you just saw a clip of housewives making drugs. I was super fortunate to meet these two amazing trans femme artists based in LA. And we wrote the script together, and we wanted to create this like very humorous fictional cooking show of just like trans women sharing estrogen recipes with each other. And for me, it's really important to be able to contextualize my work in the cultural and social sphere so that it's not just um, like scientific knowledge that I'm spreading, but it's also a vision of what is possible with the scientific protocols. So that's why I created this cooking show, and that's why I think speculative fiction is such a useful tool if you are a biohacker or someone working with science. I'm going to kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about kind of new directions that I've been taking on this topic of hormones. So I came across this article back in 2017, and it's a scientific paper, and the scientists were actually hybridizing two species of fish, and they accidentally created a hermaphrodite fish. And then they called it a hopeful monster in the title of the paper, which I thought was super, super interesting. So this fish, it has both ovaries and testicles, so it can actually self-fertilize and create clones of itself if it's not able to find a mate. And I just thought, because of all of this toxicity and this very like alienated landscape that we live in terms of like industrially colonized, and I started to think about, well, what is the endocrine disrupted body? Because we have this pre-existing gender binary system, which is like policing bodies and basically saying if you're somewhere in between or out of the box, then you're basically like an alien, it's not normal, and you need to be fixed. So that's the societal paradigm that we have. But you can argue that every single person in this room and every person on the planet has a body that is queer because of all of these industrial chemicals that we're exposed to every single day. So this is a kind of passive queering that no one really consents to. Like we don't say like yes, like put this in my food. Like we don't have that choice. It's just the reality of the world we live in. So I'm thinking a lot about what is the fear and the anxieties that people do have when they feel like their body is changing or going outside of the norm. So I come across articles like this all the time. This is a blog post by some random person, has 80,000 hits on their website, and they're basically saying, well, I don't think it's right that the government is putting birth control pills in the water supply and turning all the men gay because we need both male and female to propagate the species, and maybe this conversation is more important than talking about people crossing the borders. So, I thought this was interesting because we have homophobia, transphobia, and xenophobia all in one paragraph. And but this is a very common reaction that people have when we're talking about bodies queering and not being able to reproduce anymore. And I think it's really problematic because we're basically saying that queer people have no stake or no position in our future, which is completely false. And I realize that a lot of our fear does come from this notion of we need to reproduce to survive. So this really like took my research to another perspective. I started to form my workshops in a more performance slash like tactical kind of way. So in the way that a play has like scenography and like act 1, act 2, act 3, I started to form my workshops around that. So I call this the 3-step process for living in an increasingly queer world. And basically, it starts off with Act 1, toxicities. We live in a toxic landscape that is colonized by hormones. Step 2, semiosis, is saying, well, we're already alien. Let's test our blood. Let's test our urine. We find plastics inside, so we're already queering. We're already alien. Step 3 is subjectivities, which is actually asking for your consent. Do you want to be more alien than you already are? So I created a couple of like participatory performances around this like Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. And this is a project I have called Molecular Queering Agency. I created this fictional agency where it's gently guiding the participants through the process of queering, saying, it's okay, our bodies are not as fixed and recalcitrant as we would like to think they are, and that we actually need these mutations in order to adapt and form resilience for our future. I also have this, I call it like a urine fountain that we gather around in a circle, and we're offering our urine into this fountain, and we're kind of worshiping it, and we're donating it as some kind of disobedient liquid to this biocommons, this that's represented by the fountain. And then I also have them wear these oxygen masks that are connected to hormones that have been extracted by previous participants. So they consent to everything. They put the mask on. They consent to queering, basically. They consent to be colonized. And we just perform this ritual together. And I've also done this in like workshop form. And I started to really enjoy this like circular motif of like, you know, everyone gathers around like witches that are gathered around the pot, and we're all throwing recipes inside and performing a ritual. So I really like this idea of putting participants in into a performance without them knowing it, which leads me to this collective that I'm part of. They're called the Aliens in Green, and we take all of these performance elements to like the next level times 100. Like we will run workshops that are 8 hours long, 10 hours long, the whole day, and 25 participants, and we just do all these crazy things to them. So we are the aliens in green, and we are abducting the participants. We take their measurements, we take their urine, we take samples from them. We bring them into this vulnerable state, and which is related to Act 1, toxicities, because when you find out that this world is colonized by chemicals, there is this feeling that your body is stolen. So we try to enact that. And then as the workshop goes on, we give them a bunch of kind of role-playing exercises. Like they'll take on political ideologies, like you are an eco-conservative person, but you're also very like homophobic in your arguments to the lobbying of the government. And so we give them these roles to play. And we also give them a lot of like practical exercises, a lot of labor that they have to perform. Like there's these contraptions where they have to actually milk the hormones. So they're constantly doing this motion, trying to get the hormones out of their urine. We also have them like perform like cooking recipes, like cooking a bunch of like estrogen-rich foods. So a lot of labor, and then at the end of it, we take the hormones, we dissolve them in alcohol, like vodka or something, and we ask everyone to take a shot with us. So that's how we end the performance with this. We call it the re-subjectivization of the participants. Another recent work that I've been doing this year actually is a project called Genital Panic. Because I'm still like thinking about this fear and this anxiety aspect when it comes to endocrine disruption, and thinking about what it means to be in a normal body, what it means to be in an endocrine disrupted body, I started to think a lot about the genitals, which is the most gendered part of our bodies. in a lot of my research, I always come across these articles where scientists are measuring the distance between your anus and your genitals. And they do this for non human species as well. So the hypothesis is that the more plastics or the more endocrine disrupting molecules that you're exposed to, especially in the womb, like if your mother was exposed to a lot of it, the shorter the distance between your anus and your genitals. And this has been happening like on a population scale, like over time. Like we do have a shorter distance than our ancestors. Um, so I thought this was really interesting. And so I created this kind of gynecology office, like a gynecology clinic. And I wanted to create this situation where you get into this chair, you're asked to take off your clothes, and you examine what's between your legs and you measure yourself. And for me, I thought it was important that people have that experience of questioning, like, am I normal? Because a lot of us have the privilege of being born in a normal body, but of course, there's people who aren't, and they're they're just uh, thrown into a completely discriminatory and like a horrible system of, you know, really bad like healthcare for intersex people or like intersex surgeries. So there's just a lot of violence that happens to people who are not fitting into these boxes. Um, so part of this project is also including a 3D scanning element. So I had this idea of creating this anonymous database of genital scans, 3D genital scans. And I also have the participants enter some demographic data. So I have them enter their age, their gender identity, and then the distance between their anus and genitals. And I purposefully left out the gender you're assigned at birth because for me, that shouldn't matter. And because who cares what some doctor says the second you're born, like say that you're male or female. I have a child myself, and when she was born, the doctors said she's female. And then when I thought about why, it's like they literally just looked between her legs. And that's a huge statement to make, like, your daughter is female. Like, that's a huge statement. It's gonna uh, take over her life, you know? It's gonna determine so many things about her identity, how she's socialized. So this happens to every single one of us. You know, a doctor is telling us what our gender is. So I was thinking, well, what if we reverse that relationship and with a crowdsourced database, it's basically like we are the ones that are determining what are the definitions of normal and natural. So it's a very like in progress project. This is just a close up of one of the posters inside the doctor's office. Um, I'm working with the creative technologists to basically design the software for 3D scanning, but we want to develop it more into this database where people can contribute anonymously. And I feel like it's one of those projects that are going to produce a lot more questions and answers, but it's very much in the beginning stages. And here's the exhibition that I just had in Vienna showcasing this project. And yeah, anonymous database. The last project I'm going to talk about is based on a 10-month residency that I just finished in Indonesia. So I was really fortunate to start this research project that I called River Gynecology. And the whole idea is diagnosing and caring for the river as if it were your own body. So this is Kali Chode, which is the main river that runs from the north to the south in Yogyakarta, Indonesia. Um, the people there, they actually believe it to be a highway that connects two spiritual kingdoms, the volcano in the north and the South Sea. So what's really interesting is, although it has spiritual power, it's also the most polluted river in Jogja. And you can see there's lots of plastic waste, there's a lot of domestic waste, there's also a lot of untreated sewage that goes directly into the river. And there's some industrial effluent that comes from nearby hotels and maybe like batik factories and also hospitals. So this river is just like the catch-all for all waste that we don't want anymore. So my work took a very like reflective approach. Like a lot of people when they see this installation, they always say like it looks nothing like my work that I usually do. But I just thought it was really interesting because how do we approach this topic to people who are extremely marginalized, who are living along the river? And how do we approach this without using like fear or judgment or shame? Because these people, they don't choose to live there, but they're also happy to live there. They have their community, they have their families. Like they're just a very, very collectivist society. So I was just thinking, like, what is the best strategy to approach a situation where these people are exposed to chemicals and harmful molecules every single day since they were born? Um, so I have these latex sculptures that are hanging on the wall, and I basically want to recreate the river, but replace the water with skin. So I use latex because for me it resembles skin, and I just wanted to think about this porosity that all of us have, which allows things to flow inside and things to flow out of us. So this constant movement between our bodies, unlike plastic, which is a barricade between you and the outside world. In the center, I have a bamboo sculpture that I filled with agar. And it's actually a scaled model of the river. I asked my friend, who's an amazing woodworker, to create this out of bamboo. So that's Kelly Chode, the river. And I filled it with agar. And the agar is supposed to invite contamination. And inside the sculpture, there's also these petri dishes of bioremediating fungi that I've been working with, that I've been researching. And this fungi is able to break down some of these harmful molecules. So I want to play with this juxtaposition of contamination and closure and sterility. And lastly, we have this projection in the back, which is actually a mandala that I created out of all of the trash that I collected from the river. And this is kind of what I think about, what I envision is happening inside our bodies, because I think when people throw trash away, like we all do, we throw away packaging in the trash, and um, these objects are not. They're breaking down. They're breaking down to microplastics, and these microplastics enter our bodies through food, through water, through the air, and they're kind of recombining inside our bodies and creating new forms. So initially, I was creating a mandala because it's a common Buddhist practice of creating order out of chaos. But I decided I wanted this mandala to be moving as if it were like a kaleidoscope effect. So it represents like this constant recombination of our bodies, what's happening inside our bodies, and just kind of showing that we are not fixed, we're constantly changing. And likewise, gender does not have a final destination, we're always changing. So I'm gonna end on this slide. Um, I really like this diagram that I found. Someone like they took a blood sample and then they identified every single molecule that's flowing through that one blood sample at that given moment. But it's just a tiny like one little snapshot of yourself in one moment in time, and the next second your blood can be completely different. So I like to think of our bodies as a glitching organism. And if you think about glitch, a glitch is, in the mechanical sense, uh, it's actually defying the binary of computer language, zeros and ones. So our bodies are also glitches. We are defying the gender binary. So thank you very much.
So we can take questions, and I think if you stay at the podium,
I'll just pass the mic around.
Sure.
If there are any questions for Mary. Oh, okay.
Hello. So I'm curious, you mentioned how ubiquitous estrogen is. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on how humans would have been affected differently had it been another hormone that was like all over the place in our rivers and everything.
Like testosterone.
Yeah, sure.
Um, I feel like we would see similar health effects actually because estrogen and testosterone, like they're not um, they're they exist together and their presence also affects each other. So testosterone is actually a precursor to estrogen. So there's one argument that women actually have more testosterone than men to make estrogen. Um, but I just think it's really interesting because a lot of us were wondering, like, why is it the estrogen molecule that is affecting us, or why are so many compounds mimicking estrogen and not testosterone, for example? And there's this really interesting research about the evolutionary history of the estrogen receptor, and it's actually a highly conserved molecule among all animal taxa. So it basically, like, we can't figure out which evolved first, the receptor or the molecule, but we know that this molecule is so important in just like the general functioning of our body, like with metabolism, with your mood, like everything. It's responsible for everything, which goes against the common misconception that it's just a sex hormone, it's just for reproductive function. But no, it actually regulates a lot of our body functioning. So testosterone is the same thing. So I imagine if it were testosterone, like a lot of our normal body functions would also go wrong. So, um, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks.
How did the pharmas generate estrogen and testosterone?
So I was reading somewhere that estrogen and progesterone are actually one of the uh, most highly manufactured synthetic compounds in the world. So that gives you a sense of how much these companies are profiting off of women and trans and maybe even male bodies. And I think the main approach is synthetically. Like they have these like chemical synthesis, like big vats of like starter molecules, and then they'll just like form synthetically like the estrogen or progesterone molecule. There are some companies that are taking a more biological approach. Like they have these like transgenic tobacco plants or transgenic yeast that act like these biofactories that are just they're genetically modified, so they are producing like precursors to estrogen or progesterone, and then they'll just like extract it, like they'll like lyse them open and get the molecule out of these organisms. So um, which is, I think it's getting increasingly popular, like using like creating these biofactories. Like, these spider goats are really common now. There's a farm like out in Utah where they have these goats that are creating silk proteins in their milk. So they're all transgenic goats, and they produce silk proteins in their milk, and they extract them and they spin them into silk. And yeah, so it's a growing phenomenon now.
Can you talk a little bit more about audience reaction? So I see that your audience is also participating, so they're inhaling the molecules, they're going into rooms and measuring their genitalia. How do they react, and or what are the variety of reactions that you've gotten through the years?
Um, I think that there always is this sense of fear, like a little bit of anxiety, because if you think about gender, for example, it's a very very highly entrenched ideology that we have. Like we're brainwashed since we're born. Like what is it to be male and what is it to be female? Um, so I think having participants like think of that as a black box that needs to be deconstructed, I think can be really jarring in the beginning. Um, I also find that that's why we created our workshops to kind of be very long and kind of, we take time to to neutralize that fear, and then we can have more productive discussions. Um, but I think, I mean, I really like this particular practice, because not only am I like spreading like scientific knowledge, but I also get to know people's ideologies, and it really comes out when we're talking about like body politics and gender and things like that. So, um, yeah, I would say like there's always that sense of fear, basically. Yeah, but we need to come over that in order to really think more progressively, or create new subjectivities around this topic.
Thank you. It was a great talk.
Thank you.
I mean, it's always fascinating to see how you can flip the coin from the perspective of the estrogen. You're looking at the body from the perspective of estrogen, and also looking at estrogen from the perspective of the human. And I always wonder how far we can go with like taking the side of estrogen as opposed to always seeing it as a threat. And you hinted a little bit like we are worried about their bodies being colonized by estrogen, but also maybe estrogen, we are hijacking estrogen to change ourselves. So
Mm-hmm.
do you see this usually as a collaboration between these things, or or is it this one molecule dominating the human kingdom now because it's spreading around?
I'm really glad you asked that question, because I have done like kind of exercises with myself, taking the position of the estrogen molecule. And that's kind of how I wrote the script for the molecular querying agency, because I was thinking about what is that perspective. Well, we know that all of these harmful molecules are carried by water, but water is the source of life. So the molecule basically, it's a foreigner everywhere that it goes. It's being carried by water, by air, also. And yeah, I was thinking a lot about, um, it is like a collaboration in the sense that it's everywhere. So it's actually like free for us to extract, to detect. It's not just something to be seen as a threat that we have to avoid this colonization, but actually we can't. So I think adopting that perspective, like, it's a little bit liberating in a sense, because I think once we accept the situation that we are colonized and we are all inhabiting alien bodies, you know, um, I think that's where new imaginations can come out. So again, like freeing ourselves from this like eco heteronormative thinking, um, and viewing estrogen molecule as a collaborator definitely helped me to think that way.
On the topic of audience response with reference to the last piece, I was wondering if the communities around that body of water had access to see the exhibit, and if so, like, did you notice any trend in responses? Did you get to like communicate with them while developing the exhibit? Like, what was that process?
I brought some people that I had interviewed to see the exhibition, and to be honest, I got a really like their response was really vague, and it could have something to do with like Indonesian culture, and also like the language barrier that I had. But I think because they are coming from a marginalized position in society, that they had never been inside a museum before, like, and it was like the Jogja National Museum, so for them it was like a whole other world. And so um yeah, I think for me it was unclear how they felt. Yeah, which, after I created that piece, it was halfway through my residency. So it had been 5 months that I was living in Jogja, and I realized that I didn't want to create work for museums anymore, because I I wasn't making any impact to the community that I was working with and interviewing, and the kids there who played with my kid. There was no impact at all, And in the museum, like everyone just went there to take selfies with my work. So after that, I just like I didn't make any more art. Actually, I just focused on like giving workshops or like doing hacking or like just giving presentations about like endocrine disruption. So yeah, it was kind of yeah interesting. Like it was like a wake up call to see like how extractive the art world can be and how it just like doesn't do any service to people in the real world.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. If there's
yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm curious about the oscillation between your work that's so much rooted in science and how it's shaped the conversation around gender politics. And I'm interested in that kind of dynamic and how it's shaped each other, but also if in your work you found kind of unintended consequences as well, and how that has maybe leaked its way into gender politics and like that whole conversation. It's a heavy one, but I'm curious.
Okay. Thinking about how to answer. I think my work has been contextualized in a lot of like post-cyber feminist discourse, which is interesting because in addition to reading a lot of scientific papers, I also read a lot of like queer theory or like queer phenomenology or something like that. And I think um, I think it is like a very niche perspective, like to combine like hormones and body politics, gender, and also toxicity. I think it's like it's entered a very niche and also academic bubble. There are a lot of conferences now that are dedicated to like queer toxicity, which is interesting. It's interesting to find that discourse like emerging. But for me, I think it's still important to make work as accessible as possible because I am coming from this hacker ethos, and this knowledge should be like consumable by anyone. So I think that's why like I will sometimes like run away from theory and then I'll go more into practice because I think where I'm most passionate is actually working with regular people. So yeah.
awesome. So unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you all for being here.
Yes, and thank you to Mary.
Thank you very much.
That was awesome. I encourage you to go up and see the exhibition again. Also, we have a program guide. We're doing a lot of programs around the show if you're interested. And one of them that I will highlight is this Friday Remix, where Mary will be giving some detours of the collection. So come on back.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was great.
Thank you.